Have you ever looked at your blood test and seen the word creatinine, then told yourself it's probably nothing? I feel fine. I'm Dr. Mark Ellis, and I need you to hear this clearly, because that single number you're brushing off could be the earliest warning your kidneys will ever give you. And once it's ignored for too long, there is often no loud alarm, no pain, no second chance. Creatinine doesn't rise overnight, and kidney damage rarely announces itself dramatically. It creeps in quietly while you're still walking, still eating what you believe are healthy foods, still living your normal life. And that's exactly why chronic kidney disease is one of the most dangerous silent conditions affecting millions of Americans today. Here's what makes this even more unsettling. Many of the foods people eat because they want to protect their health are unknowingly placing extra strain on already struggling kidneys, pushing creatinine higher day after day without any obvious symptoms to warn them. By the time fatigue, swelling, or blood pressure issues appear, significant damage may already be done. But this is not a message of fear, it's a message of timing. Because when creatinine starts to rise, nutrition becomes one of the most powerful tools you still control. And small, precise changes can dramatically reduce the burden on your kidneys before things reach a critical point. In this video, I'm going to show you which common foods, especially certain nuts that are widely promoted as healthy, may actually be working against your kidneys, and more importantly, which smarter alternatives can help support filtration, reduce inflammation, and stabilize creatinine naturally even as we age. And if you stay with me until the end, you'll understand why protecting your kidneys doesn't require extreme diets or fear. It requires clarity, awareness, and choosing the right foods at the right time. After understanding why rising creatinine is such a serious early warning, the next question becomes uncomfortable but necessary. What are we doing every single day that quietly pushes that number higher without us realizing it? This is where nutrition matters more than medication for many people, because the kidneys don't fail. Suddenly they get overwhelmed slowly, meal by meal, choice by choice. Let me start with one of the most misunderstood healthy foods I see in my clinic: cashews. I remember a 62-year-old patient who came to me genuinely confused. He exercised, avoided sugar, rarely ate red meat, and snacked on cashews every afternoon because he believed they were heart healthy. His creatinine kept climbing anyway, and he couldn't understand why. What he didn't realize was that his kidneys were paying the price for a habit that looked harmless on the surface. Here's the science behind it. Cashews are extremely high in phosphorus. Just 100 grams contains over 660 milligrams, which is dangerously close to the daily upper limit recommended for people with reduced kidney function. When the kidneys can't clear excess phosphorus efficiently, it builds up in the bloodstream, triggering vascular calcification, accelerating inflammation, and forcing the kidneys to work harder just to maintain balance, a perfect recipe for rising creatinine. And that's not all. Cashews also contain a significant amount of potassium, another mineral that compromised kidneys struggle to regulate. When potassium accumulates, it doesn't just affect the kidneys, it disrupts heart rhythm, raises blood pressure, and increases fatigue, especially in adults over 50. According to clinical guidelines published in the Clinical Journal of the American Society of Nephrology, even modest phosphorus overload can worsen outcomes in early-stage kidney disease. The most dangerous part: you don't feel any of this happening. No pain, no warning. Just a slow increase in creatinine on your lab report while life feels normal. That's why cashews are so deceptive. They don't hurt immediately, but they quietly demand more filtration than weakened kidneys can give. Now, I want you to pause for a moment and ask yourself this honestly. Do you snack on cashews because you believe they're helping your health? Have you ever checked how much phosphorus you're actually consuming in a day? If this feels uncomfortably familiar, you're not alone. And that awareness alone can change the direction of your kidney health. But here's the critical transition most people miss. Cashews aren't dangerous because they're bad food. They're dangerous because timing, quantity, and kidney capacity no longer match, especially as we age. And once you see how one healthy nut can quietly strain your kidneys, it raises a bigger question. What about the others you eat without a second thought? Because knowing this alone isn't enough. There's another commonly praised nut that may be even more dangerous for creatinine, and most people never see it coming. If cashews quietly strain the kidneys through phosphorus overload, the next nut is even more deceptive, because it's been crowned a nutritional hero for decades, praised in headlines, diet plans, and heart health campaigns. And that nut is almonds. In fact, when patients tell me they've switched to almonds to be healthier, I already know what their lab results are going to show. One woman I worked with in her late 50s was doing everything right, at least on paper. She replaced cookies with almonds, kept a small bowl by her desk, and reached for them whenever she felt hungry. Her blood pressure crept up, her creatinine slowly followed, and she couldn't connect the dots. What she didn't realize was that her kidneys were being quietly overwhelmed, not by sugar, not by junk food, but by something marketed as clean and wholesome. Here's the critical science most people never hear. Almonds are extremely high in potassium. Just one small 28-gram serving contains around 200 milligrams, and many people eat 3 or 4 times that amount without thinking. For healthy kidneys, potassium is manageable. But when kidney filtration begins to weaken, potassium regulation becomes one of the first systems to fail. Excess potassium doesn't just stay in the blood, it interferes with nerve signals, muscle contraction, and heart rhythm. According to the National Kidney Foundation, individuals with elevated creatinine are often advised to keep daily potassium intake below 2,000 tolerance to 2,500 milligrams. Now consider this: 100 grams of almonds can contain over 700 milligrams of potassium. Add in bananas, avocados, tomatoes, or spinach later in the day, and suddenly your kidneys are facing a load they were never meant to handle, quietly, repeatedly, and without warning signs. This is what makes almonds especially dangerous. The symptoms of high potassium, fatigue, tingling, muscle weakness, even subtle heart rhythm changes are often dismissed as stress or aging. Meanwhile, creatinine continues to rise, not because the kidneys failed overnight, but because they were asked to do too much for too long. So let me ask you directly, and I want you to answer honestly, even if only to yourself. Do you snack on almonds throughout the day? Do you believe they're automatically safe because they're natural and heart healthy? If so, you may be protecting one system while silently exhausting another, and the kidneys almost never complain until they're in trouble. But here's the deeper truth that changes everything. Almonds aren't the enemy. Unawareness is. When kidney capacity drops, foods that once served you well can quietly become liabilities, and almonds are often the first example people overlook. But knowing this still isn't enough, because there's one more nut that looks gentle, even comforting, yet maybe more damaging to the kidneys than either cashews or almonds. And almost no one suspects it. After seeing how cashews overload phosphorus and almonds quietly flood the body with potassium, it would be easy to assume the next risk must be another rich, oily nut. But the most surprising one I see causing trouble in older adults looks nothing like a typical problem food. It feels soft, comforting, seasonal, and that's exactly why chestnuts catch so many people off guard. I once spoke with a man in his late 60s who avoided most nuts because of fat, yet proudly told me he ate roasted chestnuts in the evenings because they felt light and easy on his stomach. His creatinine had been creeping upward for years, and no one could explain why. What he didn't know was that chestnuts challenge the kidneys in a very different and often overlooked way. Here's what the science shows. Unlike most nuts, chestnuts are very high in starch and complex carbohydrates, making up nearly 80% of their calories. That means they raise blood sugar much faster than people expect. When blood sugar spikes, the kidneys are forced to work harder to maintain internal balance, especially in adults whose filtration capacity is already declining. Over time, this repeated metabolic stress contributes to inflammation and rising creatinine. But there's another layer most people never consider. Chestnuts are also high in oxalates, compounds that bind with calcium and increase the risk of kidney stone formation. According to data referenced by the Mayo Clinic, consistent oxalate intake around 100 milligrams per day can significantly raise the risk of calcium oxalate stones, the most common type seen in older adults. A single 100-gram serving of chestnuts can bring you dangerously close to that threshold without you realizing it. This is what makes chestnuts especially misleading. They don't feel heavy, they don't taste salty, they don't trigger immediate discomfort. But behind the scenes, they create a perfect storm: blood, sugar, stress, oxalate buildup, and increased filtration demand, all while giving you the illusion of a gentle, kidney-friendly food. So let me ask you something important. Do you eat chestnuts because they feel safer than other snacks? Do you enjoy them more often during colder months without thinking twice? If so, you're not making a careless choice, you're making an uninformed one, and that distinction matters. Here's the transition most people need to hear. Chestnuts aren't harmful because they're indulgent. They're harmful because they hide their impact, especially in aging kidneys that no longer adapt the way they once did. And when foods look harmless, we tend to eat more of them, which is exactly how quiet damage accelerates. But understanding which nuts to avoid is only half the story, because what truly changes kidney outcomes isn't just what you remove, it's what you replace it with, and the next part may surprise you even more. Up to this point, we've talked about what quietly harms the kidney's foods that look harmless, even healthy, yet slowly push creatinine higher. But here's where the story changes, because kidney protection isn't just about avoidance. It's about choosing something that actively helps the kidneys let go of what they're struggling to clear. And one of the most underestimated tools I've seen do this is ground flaxseed. I remember recommending flaxseed to a patient in his early 60s who felt stuck. His creatinine wasn't dangerously high, but it refused to come down despite medication and clean eating. He was skeptical. Flaxseed sounded too simple, almost insignificant. 12 weeks later, his lab work told a different story, and more importantly, his kidneys were no longer fighting the same daily pressure. Here's why flaxseed is different. When properly ground flaxseed is rich in soluble fiber lignans and plant-based omega-3 fatty acids, all of which support kidney function in a very specific way. Soluble fiber binds nitrogenous waste in the gut, helping the body eliminate substances like urea and creatinine before they overload the kidneys. This means less work for already stressed filtration units. In fact, a 20-20 study published in the journal Renal Failure found that individuals with mild kidney impairment who consumed 30 grams of ground flaxseed daily for 12 weeks reduced blood creatinine levels by an average of 18%. That's not a supplement claim, that's a measurable physiological shift, especially meaningful for adults over 50. Flaxseed also delivers alpha-linolenic acid, a powerful anti-inflammatory omega-3 that protects the delicate tubules inside the kidneys. Chronic low-grade inflammation is one of the most overlooked drivers of declining filtration, and flaxseed addresses this quietly, consistently, and without stressing potassium or phosphorus balance. But how you use flaxseed matters just as much as whether you use it. Whole flax seeds often pass through the digestive system untouched. They need to be freshly ground to unlock their benefits. 1 to 2 tablespoons per day mixed into oatmeal yogurt or even warm water is enough to create real change as long as hydration is adequate. And this is where I want you to pause and reflect. Have you been searching for complicated cleanses, expensive powders, or extreme diets when something this simple could reduce the load your kidneys carry every day? Sometimes the most effective support doesn't shout, it works quietly in the background, exactly where the kidneys need relief. But flaxseed is only the beginning of the shift. Because once inflammation starts to calm and waste begins to clear more efficiently, there's another food richer, more satisfying that supports kidney recovery in a completely different way. And many people avoid it out of fear without realizing how helpful it can be. Because knowing this alone still isn't enough. There's another option ahead that surprises most people, and it may change how you think about fats, calories, and kidney health altogether. Once inflammation begins to calm and waste, clearance improves with something as gentle as ground flaxseed. Many people assume the next step must be extreme, fewer calories, less fat, more restriction. But this is where kidney care often goes wrong, because the right kind of fat can actually protect filtration rather than burden it. And one of the most misunderstood examples is macadamia nuts. I often meet patients who avoid macadamias entirely because they're labeled too rich or too indulgent. One man in his early 60s told me he'd stopped eating them years ago, out of fear they would worsen his labs. When we reviewed his diet, the problem wasn't fat at all. It was inflammation and electrolyte overload from other sources. When macadamias were reintroduced carefully, his numbers stabilized and his energy improved without adding stress to his kidneys. Here's the reason this works. Macadamia nuts are made up of nearly 78% monounsaturated fat, including omega-7, a fatty acid shown to reduce inflammatory signaling in tissues, including the kidneys. Unlike many other nuts, macadamias are remarkably low in potassium and phosphorus, which makes them uniquely kidney-friendly for people managing elevated creatinine. A 2021 study published in the Journal of Functional Foods demonstrated that omega-7 intake significantly lowered pro-inflammatory cytokines that damage the glomeruli and kidney tubules, the very structures responsible for blood filtration. This means macadamias don't just avoid harm, they actively reduce inflammatory pressure that accelerates kidney decline. What matters most is dosage and timing. 5 to 7 raw unsalted macadamia nuts per day is enough to deliver benefit without overwhelming digestion. Eaten between meals mid-morning or mid-afternoon, they stabilize blood sugar, reduce snacking, and support vascular health without forcing the kidneys to compensate for excess electrolytes. This is fat used strategically, not indulgently. But there's an important caution here. Macadamias should not be eaten late at night, and they should never be salted. Sleep is when kidneys repair, and heavy fats too close to bedtime can disrupt that process. Used thoughtfully, though, macadamias become a quiet ally, satisfying, anti-inflammatory, and metabolically gentle. Now pause and ask yourself something honest. Have you been cutting out foods that could actually support your kidneys because you were taught to fear fat? If so, this shift in understanding can be liberating because kidney health isn't about eating less, it's about eating smarter. But even this isn't the full picture. Because while macadamias calm inflammation and reduce electrolyte stress, there's one more food that directly supports kidney filtration and cellular repair, and it's often overlooked or misused in the wrong way. Because knowing this alone still isn't enough. There's one final choice ahead that may quietly determine how well your kidneys recover over time, and most people never use it correctly. After calming inflammation with the right fats and reducing unnecessary electrolyte stress, we arrive at a final food that does something very few others can. It doesn't just support the kidneys indirectly, it helps protect the very cells responsible for filtration. And that food is walnuts. I often tell patients that walnuts look ordinary, almost boring, which is why many people underestimate them. One woman in her early 70s once told me she stopped eating walnuts because she thought all nuts are bad for the kidneys. Yet her labs showed persistent inflammation, and her creatinine wouldn't stabilize despite careful eating. When walnuts were reintroduced slowly and correctly, her inflammatory markers improved, and her kidney function stopped declining. Here's what makes walnuts different. They are one of the richest plant sources of alpha-lanolinic acid, a powerful omega-3 fatty acid that directly reduces chronic low-grade inflammation, one of the primary drivers of kidney damage as we age. Unlike omega-3 supplements, walnuts deliver this fat together with polyphenols and tocopherols, compounds that protect kidney cells from oxidative stress. A study published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition found that regular walnut consumption reduced C-reactive protein levels by more than 30% within just 12 weeks, while markers of vascular and kidney health improve simultaneously. This matters because when inflammation drops, kidney filtration doesn't have to fight against constant cellular injury. It can finally stabilize. Walnuts are also different from many other nuts because their potassium and phosphorus levels are moderate, not excessive. This makes them safer for people with early or moderate kidney impairment when eaten in controlled amounts. 4 to 5 walnut halves per day is enough to deliver benefit without overwhelming the kidneys. They're best eaten after breakfast or as a mid-afternoon snack, never on an empty stomach. Preparation matters here as well. Lightly soaking or gently toasting walnuts improves digestibility and reduces bitterness. And it's critical to avoid walnuts that taste rancid or bitter, as these may contain aflatoxins that place additional stress on both the liver and kidneys, the opposite of what we want. At this point, something important becomes clear. Kidney protection isn't about removing everything you enjoy. It's about understanding which foods heal, which ones harm, and which ones simply depend on timing and dose. Walnuts represent balanced nourishment without overload, protection without restriction. But before we close, there's one final truth most people never hear. Food choices alone don't decide kidney outcomes, patterns do. How foods are combined, timed, and repeated day after day can determine whether creatinine stabilizes or keeps rising silently. Because knowing which foods to choose is powerful, but understanding the final piece that ties everything together may be what truly decides whether your kidneys recover or continue to decline. And that's exactly what we need to talk about next. If there's one thing I hope you take away from this video, it's this: your kidneys don't need perfection and they don't need extreme diets, they need understanding. Small, consistent choices made with awareness can quietly change the direction of your health, even if your creatinine has already started to rise. And if you're watching this and feeling worried, please know this concern means you still have time, and time means you still have options. I encourage you to pause after this video and gently reflect on your daily habits, not with fear, but with curiosity. Simple changes in what you snack on, how often you eat certain foods, and how you support your body each day can reduce unnecessary strain on your kidneys more than most people realize. And you don't have to do everything at once. Progress happens one choice at a time. If this information helped you understand your health a little more clearly, please save this video so you can come back to it and share it with someone you care about who may be silently struggling with kidney issues. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel. We share clear, science-based medical insights designed to help you protect your kidneys, understand your lab results, and make confident health decisions as you age. Your kidneys work quietly for you every single day. When you start listening to them and supporting them with the right knowledge, they often respond more than you expect. Thank you for spending this time with me. Take care of yourself, be patient with your body, and I'll see you in the next video.